Thank you. So this talk, where cypherpunk meets organized crime, I'm going to be looking at the evolution of organized crime, the dark web, electronic, financially motivated crime, and where it clashes and intersects with encryption. So there we go. A little bit about myself. I work for Akamai Technologies for my day job. If you look in your router logs, anyone, you'll probably see us a lot. And for them, I do a lot of research on dark web, underground economies, cybercrime, and anything that looks like it's going to be generating an environment that will lead to issues for our customers or our own company. I also do advanced CISSP training. I do not hold a CISSP. I also get to do incident response, both internally for the company when there are major issues, but also for our customers when they're under attack. And those sort of IR events are the most fun for me. I also get to be a chaos monkey, just going around the company, breaking stuff, and then working with those teams to make their products or their services more resilient. To give you some context for what I am and am not going to be talking about, what's in scope is stuff that is financially motivated specifically. So not general cracking or phreaking, things like that, but things that have a component to them that involve like e-banking, e-commerce, digital currencies, marketplaces, those sorts of things. Also, some more context for the talk. When I say darknet, or dark web, or deep web. A lot of times the media uses these terms interchangeably, but they do have very specific meanings in and of themselves. So you have your basic surface web, and then on top of that, you're going to have an overlay network, which is going to be the deep web, and this is going to be things that aren't indexed by Google or by Yahoo or, God forbid, by Bing. Sorry if there's any Microsoft folks here. And then on top of that is going to be your dark web, which the dark web, now the web part is important because when you're talking about a dark web, you're talking about something where you can actually go to a site and interact with it. Now, there's much more outside of that that is dark, and here we can call these dark nets. And there are different frameworks for a dark net, and it's not just Tor, and we'll talk about those later. But that includes services that don't necessarily have a web component, but are still not indexed by search engines. So in the beginning, there was electronic crime that was financially motivated, that was wire fraud. I'm going to give you 3 quick stories, and then I'm going to give you the around the dates that these things happened. So in Missouri, there was a series of network administration job scams. And what would happen is a company would set up, and they would claim to be affiliated with the large network in the area. And they would have, stickers on their windows and all this stuff. And they would tell people, give us some money up front, and then we'll train you, and then you'll be guaranteed a position administering this network for this large company. And these sorts of scams are still ongoing now. What's funny about this one is that what would happen is these people would, after paying their money, and sometimes they get some crappy training, sometimes they wouldn't, then they'd walk into the office of the major network and say, hey, I went through this training, I got my certification, they even gave me this paper, so please put me in a job. And of course, the major network company would say, we have no affiliation, you're not guaranteed a job, what are you talking about, get out of here. So the next sort of pre-cybercrime story is about international banking and wire fraud. And you see this all the time. People get emails saying like, oh, hey, I'm your friend so-and-so, and I'm trapped in this country, and I got robbed, and I need you to send me money, wire me money. So this was happening specifically in Turkey, people posing as Westerners that were visiting Turkey and got mugged and needed money wired to them from their bank. and they were tricking banks in Paris and London into sending them money in Turkey. And then the third instance, this is an actual wiretap where somebody went in and put in a wiretap on the network line, and this is in India, and it was two Australian fellows, actually. And they were able to start manipulating the narcotics prices in that section of India by listening to the different information that was coming in and then either altering it or choosing not to let it go through. So the dates for these particular scams, 1890, 1872, and 1861. This was all done on the Telegram network. So that's to say there's nothing new under the sun. It's just the technology that changes. All right, so we'll fast forward now to the 70s, the age of disco. And here, and it was about 1970. Some people argue it was 1969. But Al Gilbertson created the blue box. Does anybody not know what a blue box is? Okay, so real quick, blue box is a device that allows you on older payphone networks to make free long-distance calls or to get your money back after you've made a call. And it does that by signaling with very particular tones. We'll talk about what tone that is coming up. So this is where organized crime really started getting into the game for electronic-based crime. And this Las Vegas-based syndicate, I'm sure you can guess which organized crime group that was, they took a lot of bets. And they had to call New York and Chicago with information about those bets, which is very costly. So this device was something that would save them a whole lot of money. So they asked Al to create a whole bunch for him, and he even made them like cigarette-sized, and they even had a kill switch in case the cops came, and it was elaborate. And he ended up not being able to finish the deal with them because, well, they got popped by the cops before he could. Now there's something else that makes that tone that you need. Anybody recognize this? Show your age? Yeah. Okay, so this is a Captain Crunch whistle. This produces the exact 2600 hertz that you need in order to emulate what a blue box does. In 1971, John Draper, Captain Crunch, he found that the whistle produced that exact tone that he needed, and he met with an editor for Esquire magazine. And Esquire published the instructions for blue boxing, for how these telephone systems work, and how to go around a lot of the protections that are put in place. Now, I do want to point out that telephone hacking and phreaking had been going on since the 50s. Joy Bubbles, shout out to you, you're awesome. But this is where it really came into the forefront of the world's mind, and people that are non-technical are starting to find out how to do this. In 1972, we got our first online illegal trade, and there were students in the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and they thought, oh, won't it be fun if we use this new thing called ARPANET, which is precursor to the internet, to sell some marijuana to our friends over in MIT. So this is like way before Silk Road. In 1973, we got our first instance of electronic accounting fraud, and this was the Equity Funding Corporation of America. It started in 1964 with their earlier systems for ERPing, and what the person who perpetrated this was doing is they were going back in and changing the accounting ledgers in the electronic accounting system so that he could hide the embezzlement that he was performing. In that same year, the chief teller at New York's Dime Savings Bank was using one of the computer systems there to embezzle over $1.5 million. Luckily, he was caught and that money was returned. This is 1973. All right, so now we're going to start getting into the proto-darknets. These are the grandfathers of the darknets. There were no overarching network cohesiveness in terms of how ARPANET was connected to a lot of other smaller network systems that were popping up. And of course, there was no search indexing, so by default, it was dark. And in the 1970s, ARPANET started isolating networks from itself as a security measure. These networks could receive data, but they couldn't respond or inject things into the ARPANET network. And a lot of these other outside one-way connection networks ended up eventually being the internet. All right, the 80s and 90s, this is where things just really exploded for e-crime. And of course, we have the rise of hacker collectives. Of course, CCC, the CDC, the Masters, Legion of Doom, Loft Heavy Industries, my boys, Firm, and then arguably the largest hacker collective. Like, we're talking tens of thousands of people. The Chinese Honker Society, they're still going today. They're just huge. And then, of course, we get the media coming out, the movies like War Games, Hackers, and Sneakers. If you haven't seen Sneakers, you really should. It's great. This is really bringing into the homes of a lot of people this concept that there are people out there that can perpetrate these kinds of attacks or do these things with computers and networks. And of course, a lot of it was blown out of proportion or not very realistic, but this was really getting people thinking about hacking. And of course, there was a government response to this rise in recognition for hacking. You got in 1981 the first Interpol training seminar for investigators of computer crime. In 86, the US, the CFAA, oh God, what a terrible law, was released. And it's very, very broad, so it's used in a lot of ways that it shouldn't be. But this is when it first came out. In 1989, Council of Europe's recommendations were released, and this is what a lot of European countries based their subsequent cybercrime laws on. In 1988, this was actually a really great idea by the G8. They recognized that a lot of law enforcement outlets, especially the smaller ones or the regional ones, won't have tech people on staff to be able to go after these cybercriminals. So they set up a 24/7 hotline for them to call in whenever they have an investigation and get support from experts that were on staff with the G8. And this leads us into the first crypto wars. So this is mostly about containment of encryption by government entities. And in 1996, out of this concept of containing these encryption schemes, the Wassenaar arrangement was reached. And this replaced COCOM, which earlier had encryption as a military weapon. There was a general software note that was entered into this arrangement that really made a big difference from its previous iteration in COCOM, and that there were exceptions for mass market and public domain cryptography. And these were things that were spearheaded by people like Phil Zimmerman, by the developers at Netscape, just really saying, hey, we have e-commerce now, we need to be able to use encryption. And of course, Australia, France, New Zealand, Russia, and the US were like, yeah, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep these under control anyway because of national security. In 1998, there was a revision to this agreement where saying, okay, so we're going to let some of this crypto out. We're going to allow for symmetric crypto up to 56 bits, asymmetric crypto up to 512, and then subgroup-based crypto like EC up to 112, and then mass market symmetric crypto up to 64 bits. But that was actually held until December 2000, mostly by the US. And then export of all the other crypto required a license, and that is still the case for a lot of different cryptography regimes. It's something we have to deal with as a big CDN, and is something we have a team of lawyers that help us with. So now we start getting the Quasi-Darknets, and everybody strap in for a nostalgia ride. We're going to talk about BBSs, IRC, Usenet, and peer-to-peer. Does anybody recognize that? I'm sure some people in the audience will be angry about it. So bulletin board systems, great. They gave rise to a very specific subgroup of bulletin board systems called elite BBSs or elite BBSs. And here we saw a lot of software cracking wares, phreaking, hacking, tutorials for doing credit card fraud, things like that. And they were typically membership-based. That way they could try and keep out the feds. Spot the Fed actually started on these BBSs as a game. And of course, they also want to keep out the noobs. But some really, really great things came out of these elite BBSs. Yeah, they were cracking groups, and there was some cybercrime going on. But what else came out of it is the demo scene, which, I mean, I was very excited. I wasn't expecting there to be people playing, like, demo scene demos last night. That was amazing. Or the night before last. Last night? Last night. I've been awake way too long. So, of course, some of you in the audience, I'm sure, know Equinox and Nova and Hades. But also, since I'm in Sweden, I have to talk about Fairlight. So, Razer and Fairlight, like, I totally fanboy for them, and to find out that some of them were like here, I lost it. It's pretty great. And they've been around forever. We're talking like, what, 80, 84, 85, somewhere around there? And still going strong. Of course, there was a government response to these elite BBSs. In 1990, it was the Great Hacker Crackdown. The biggest operation was between the FBI and the Secret Service, and it was Operation Sun Devil. This targeted a bunch of elite BBSs, and for some reason, the frac easing was also lumped into that operation and targeted. And all they did was disseminate information. I mean, they weren't actually doing anything, at least that they had evidence for. And it created a real chilling effect. A lot of BBSs shut down of their own accord after this for fear of being raided. In 94 and 95, there's been a lot of broadband speed increases. There's a lot of new internet subboards, a lot of internet hubs and chat groups. And you can now have multiple services with one connection, unlike BBSs, which require a single connection. And that hogs it up. So that starts the decline of BBSs with all of these other options being available. And then we start getting Usenet newsgroups. This is where we see the birth of mass spam, sporgery, which is spam that uses forgery. It's pretending to be somebody else that's being sent from. And we get our first large-scale bot wars. And it's mostly spam bots versus cancel bots, which are run by admins. So the spam bots would send a whole bunch of spam to a Usenet group, and then the admin would run their cancel bot and try and cancel all of the spam that was created. And then the level 2 of that were forged cancels versus aliasing out. What would happen is the spammers would use forged cancels to get rid of all of their competitor spam and to get rid of the admin's messages. And then the admin would come back in and then alias out all of those forged cancels. And then they developed, of course, tools to do this automatically. In 1994, there was a huge decline for Usenet groups. This is what's typically referred to as the Endless September. It was mostly AOL's fault. And so what happened was they sent out, all of those disks that everybody saw everywhere that filled trash cans. Part of the service included Usenet groups, which means noobs just flooded into all of the established Usenet groups. They didn't know the etiquette. They didn't really know what they were doing. So it was a type of spam, but it was people that were just doing whatever they wanted on the Usenet, and it was chaos. So a lot of the older Usenet users started moving off of that. The New York Attorneys General used Usenet for their major spearhead for their crackdown on child porn on the internet. And what that did is it caused a lot of ISPs to drop their Usenet services so they didn't get targeted by the New York AG. There were some really cool tools HipCrime's news agent was definitely the most famous Usenet abuse tool. And what it did is it gave you essentially admin rights on news groups. And you could replace the body of any message using this tool. You could auto-repost the posts that an admin removed that you were spamming, and it would just automatically put them back. And it would also allow you to auto-cancel any other postings that you don't want. IRC. Does anybody remember, you get the guy's little face for MIRC, and then you click on his nose, and it makes a honking noise? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. So IRC, if I had to say like one word about it, it would be drama. Lots and lots of drama, lots of infighting, lots of forced net splits, NIC collisions, and what a forced net split does, as well as NIC collisions in a lesser extent. But if there's a channel that's run and owned by somebody else and you want to take it over, you force a net split on the network so that the channel gets created new and you get in there as the first person and now you're the new owner of that channel. And so that was used for various ends, like sometimes it would just be groups infighting, or it'd be used to actually be able to do spamming or to be able to get people to think that you're legitimately somebody else so they download your virus or whatever. There was a lot of wares, a lot of really good music sharing. Movies, of course, but at that time they were so large it took forever. Oh my God. Scanned books, lots and lots of porn, and then malware, bots, and drugs. Dalnet, pound drugs, man. That was a huge channel, and we started to see people actually meeting up in person based on that channel in order to exchange drugs for money or drugs for drugs. Also, Spot the Fed really blew up as a game, and Mute the Noob, of course. And then we would do red flag keyword seeding, which was a lot of fun. This was way before Edward Snowden, where whenever we're typing stuff in, having a normal conversation, be like, oh, hey, yeah, I met James at the park, terrorist bomb threat, and then, he told me he needed to go pick up his cousin from the airport, and then we just put in these little keywords, and I'm sure the NSA or whoever was listening, not amused. These look familiar? I'm sure nobody here has ever used any of these, right? And I'm sure you've never got a virus from any of these. I would say out of all of these, though, SoulSeek was my favorite. It was a really good community. A lot of independent music producers would use that platform to share their music. Also copywritten music, but, whatever. And these are Quasi-Darknets, and that this stuff is not indexed. You can't go on Google and be like, well, not that time, it wouldn't be Google, it would be what, Alta Vista? Dogpile? Lycos. Ask Jeeves, maybe. And then, of course, I can't mention Quasi-Darknets without talking about sneaker nets. One of the things that I'm really excited to see out of the lifting of the US embargo on Cuba is security aficionados coming out of Cuba and doing talks at conferences like this about what it was like to live in a country where you had to have sneaker nets, you had to have little small mesh networks where you would all meet in the park and then connect your devices, and what they would do to stay away from surveillance for that. I'm really excited for those talks. All right, so before we had the darknet markets, we had clearnet versions of these. Needless to say, they didn't last very long. In about 2000, we had the counterfeit library. It was a diploma mill. You could say, I want a diploma from this university. And they'd actually use the paper and the ink that university uses and print out a diploma for you. On top of that, they also had ID fraud resources for doing ID-based scams or taking over somebody's identity in order to open a bank account, that sort of thing. In 2001, Carter Planet, which was huge, started. It was mostly a Russian community, and their major focus was credit card fraud. In 2002, the counterfeit library moved into being the Shadow Crew forums, They were unique in that they offered the first verified vendor service to say which vendors were rippers or scammers and which ones were legit. Of course, they dealt in stolen data, credit cards, ID fraud, and various guides on how to do these things. And of course, there was a law enforcement response to these. Between 2003 and 2005, Operation Firewall and Operation Anglerfish were the major operations targeting these sorts of forums. It's funny because around the same time, Carter's Market really blew up. And the way that he did that is he went around, this is Iceman, Max Butler. I'm sure some of you know who this was. This is the guy that forcibly hacked a whole bunch of people's unpatched bind systems and then patched them himself. Yeah, the cops didn't like that. So what he did to make Carter's Market so huge is he went and hacked all the other carding forums and then forcibly merged them with his. So you had to go there to log in. It's rather clever. In 2007 to now, a lot of these markets, like they're still ClearNet markets for this sort of thing, but it's very much whack-a-mole. None of them last more than a year typically, and they're just constantly going up and down, which really sucks for researchers like me. All right, so in order for these markets to be served and people not to use dumb stuff like PayPal, we needed some sort of digital currencies. And here we start getting the backed by gold currencies. Whether or not these people actually had the gold in reserve, your guess is as good as mine. eGold opened up in '96, which was huge. Pecunix, which is technically still around, but a whole different service. iGolder, all of them are essentially defunct now. And then we had Liberty Reserve. This became the biggest black market bank. Essentially, it would allow people to make transactions and not really care what sort of transactions they were making. It was very popular in criminal forums, and it was definitely used for money laundering. All right, cryptocurrencies. There are a few of them. This is just a small subset. My favorite, shout out to my favorite cryptocurrency, Coinye. I don't know why Kanye was so angry. I mean, Kanye loves Kanye. Why wouldn't he want his face on everything? Well, maybe because it makes him look like a fish, and he likes fish sticks. All right, modern darknets. Now, with these new cryptocurrencies, we start also getting modern darknets. These are darknets that were darknets by design, not by just default or a fluke. It's more than just Tor for these darknet technologies, where you can have a dark web overlaid on top of them. Tor, okay, put on your tinfoil hats. Initially developed by the US Naval Research Lab and DARPA. They are no longer affiliated with them. A lot of people would like to tell you that Tor is just a US government honeypot. I'm sure sections of it can be used that way, but no, that's conspiracy nut stuff. It was publicly released in 2002, and the Tor Foundation took over maintaining and developing it. It uses multi-layered encryption, onion encryption, for anonymous communications, or quasi-anonymous communications. And it's definitely the largest platform for darknet markets and for darknet traffic. Freenet was released in 2000. It focuses mostly on censorship-resistant communication. It wants people to have a platform to be able to say whatever they want to say without fear of a government taking down their blog or anything like that. And it uses key-based routing. I2P, anybody here use I2P? I2P is pretty great. So this is the Invisible Internet Project, and it can act as an anonymous network layer for other protocols, not just web. So you can use I2P for like FTP and things like that. And it uses an extension of the Tor onion routing called garlic routing, where you have onion nodes. Like a garlic, it has all of the little nodes. NewNet, of course, the new foundation has to get in on this. Released in 2001, it's been around a while. And it's not a darknet without turning on and adding the friend-to-friend network topography. So that's an important caveat there. And after the Edward Snowden PRISM leaks, NewNet's use just exploded. One that I've been watching that I actually want the developer to do some more work on because he has some great ideas, Netsukuku. You think by that name, it's a Japanese developer. No, it's an Italian dude. It was released in '05, and he says he's currently working on version 2.0, where he's done his own custom routing protocol, QSpin, and a custom DNS system for a darknet system, and I think that's really exciting. So you should go read about AnDNA and QSpin. It's in extreme alpha, of course, and there's been no large-scale testing yet, but I'm going to keep watching this one. ZeroNet is based on the Bitcoin crypto and BitTorrent network topology. And what they're aiming for is takedown immunity for all of their websites that they host, so that even if one node is taken down, the website still stays and keeps going. Riffle is another one that everybody